Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I had a different opening for today's session, full of statistics. But when I followed the events that unfolded in Sudan the past days, it changed my mind. El Fasher. I have seen videos of ditches and trenches, entirely full of friends, neighbors, and family members' bodies. There have been reports of entire families hanging from trees. This is the story told by Amy Mohammed to reporters from El Fasher town. Similar stories happen in Gaza, Eastern Congo, and all over the world. Proportion of children killed by armed conflicts tripled, while the proportion of women killed doubled from last year. More aid workers and health personnel were killed than ever before. The overwhelming majority of them are national colleagues. Yet, civilian harm is not an inevitable byproduct of armed conflict, because even wars have rules. In today's session, our distinguished panelists will discuss our collective responsibility in moving the parties to today's devastating conflicts away from might makes right and towards serious, tangible commitments to apply international humanitarian law and protect human dignity. Today, we have with us Mirjana Spojaric-Egger, President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Mr. José Manuel Álvarez, Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of the Kingdom of Spain, Mr. Jean-Noël Barrot, Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of the French Republic, and Ms. Kajsa Ollongren, Special Representative for Human Rights at the European Union. And as your humble moderator, Hisham Khadraoui, myself, Director of the Center for Civilians in Conflict. I will ask you the first question, Mirjana, if you allow me. States have given the ICRC a mandate to promote the Geneva Conventions and to defend them. Today, the rules of war are under threat, with parties to conflict disregarding blatantly international humanitarian law and using it to justify violations of the law rather than prevent them. What is at stake if leaders do not take action? And how can your global initiative, together with states, help to stem the tide of violations and preserve humanity in war? Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham, and thank you, colleagues. It's a great honor to be here in this honorable panel. You didn't want to start with statistics, Hisham, but I will. According to what we register, the world lives in a decade of war. Since I took office 3 years ago, we have registered 10 more conflicts, from approximately 120 to 130 armed conflicts. What is underlying is not only a rise in non-state armed groups, they are spreading more intensely than in the decade before, but also the fact that we see not only international armed conflicts, conflicts between states on the rise, but that we see large-scale conflicts on the rise, meaning 12 million displaced in Sudan, unprecedented. Gaza entirely destroyed, if not obliterated, unprecedented. We record 150,000 missing between Ukraine and Russia. We must assume it's only a portion of the reality and may not, for decades, find these missing people, many of them servicemen and servicewomen. The wars of attrition, the levels of destruction, the levels of human suffering are surpassing by far what previous decades have shown. And it all brings us back to the rules of war, as Hisham has said. We will speak more about it. But it's, according to our experience, the only way to stem the tide. The law is as forceful as the political weight that leaders attach to it. We saw this in Gaza. Without the political pressure, you don't see a pathway for us to start operating that then offers the space for negotiations over a lasting ceasefire. I'm thankful to France. I'm thankful to the 6 founding states that launched a global initiative that should lead to an international meeting next year. We by now have 92 states, and all the panelists are strong supporters of this cause. It's not about the ICRC. It's bringing back peace and security to the world through a re-establishment of awareness that without rules, we will not find a de-escalation in these ever-rising conflicts, and they inform each other. You can be sure that the next conflict will be informed by the lowered standards that we see in warfare today. So we have to reverse this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Monsieur le Ministre, France
Minister,
states alongside Brazil, China, Jordan, Kazakhstan, and South Africa, who joined the launch of the Global Initiative on IHL in December last year. In what concrete ways is France walking the talk using various instruments at its disposal? And what steps is France taking to ensure that it is more than a well-intentioned initiative and that it will lead to real change on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you. I will speak in French because after all this is the Paris Peace Forum. So if you need
je parlerai en français. I will speak in French.
Raise your hand and I will
And if you can't hear the interpretation, then please raise your hand. I would like to get back to what Mariana was saying. Figures are very clear. We have entered a time when international humanitarian law has been degraded and war are increasing, and war has become even more dirty before, with 150 million people displaced population through the various conflicts that Mariana was talking about. We have reached a record high in violations to human dignity and human rights. We talked about Sudan with the fall of al-Fashar, which brings us to fearing the worst. Think of what's happening in the Republic of Congo. This all will be at the heart of the conference that will gather this afternoon in Paris. 28 million people are facing hunger, including acute hunger. 7 million of displaced people. 1 woman is raped every 4 minutes. There is an increasing risk of devastating epidemics such as HIV and Ebola. What we see in Sudan, in Gaza, in Congo, human rights and international human law has been degraded, is being ignored. The number of conflicts is increasing, but also the way the war is conducted is increasing in violence. It seems that warmongers feel that they are free to do business as usual. So I would like to distinguish between the law of the war on the one hand and international human law on the other hand. Of course, we will not be able to put an end to all conflicts, but we need to work together to make sure that whenever a conflict takes place, then the humanitarian staff is protected, then medical staff is protected, and that the dignity of human beings is protected. We work as France, as a country, as a permanent member of the Security Council, towards this goal. We try to make sure that we have the ways of making sure that international humanitarian law is respected. So that's the reason why we want to make sure that 2 seats of the Permanent Security Council are given to Africa, that Japan, Germany, Brazil can have a seat at the Permanent Security. We make their decisions more legitimate. Moreover, we've been working with Mexico for years now to make sure that we can limit the veto in case of atrocities. It's an initiative that has been supported by over 20 countries. Now, it might seem far-fetched from what we're talking about today, but we believe that this is something that is directly linked to the International Humanitarian Law. If we could make sure that veto did not apply in case of atrocities, then we will make sure that the Security Council could act in cases that we've witnessed, such as the one that we've witnessed over the past couple of years. Moreover, we also support an initiative launched by the ICRC with Brazil, China, Jordan, Kazakhstan and South Africa to launch a global initiative that has been supported by a large number of countries, including Spain. Spain has its own voice, and I would like to turn towards and thank my colleague from Spain. Thank you for being here at the Paris Peace Forum. Thank you for picking this particular roundtable to talk about the protection of IHL. I would like to thank Spain, who has been a long-standing supporter for multilateralism and cooperation in order to deal with international issues. So I'm going to talk to you very freely here. In all transparency, the reason why we're supporting this initiative is not only to carry our voice as a group of countries who are very committed to the protection of IHL, but it's also a way to share best practices. Humanitarian issues are often instrumentalized, but sometimes it is true that the parties involved in a conflict just lack knowledge as to how to abide by IHL rules. This initiative that has been supported by ICRC has been supported by a number of countries, but I must say that I was slightly disappointed when we met in New York in order to formally put down the rules of this agreement. And when we were talking about the 2026 meeting and the 2026 conference, I suggested that we try and preempt this by coming up with a clear commitment when it comes to Gaza. And we were unable to reach a commitment together. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't continue fighting hard in order to turn this 2026 conference into a success. We don't have a choice. We need to make it happen. But in order to highlight how much political support we enjoy at the international level, we need to make sure that we train armies, that we can train diplomats, and that we can raise awareness on our best practice among all stakeholders when it comes to IHL. We need to make sure that we can raise the bar put down both by IHL and case law in order to make sure that the commitment that was made by the UN 80 years ago are still a reality today. Thank you very much.
Protection of civilians in armed conflict, and what has enabled Spain to move from supporting international humanitarian law in principle to taking concrete actions in its defense. Thank you.
Tout d'abord, et en français, parce qu'il y avait...
I'm going to speak in French. I'm going to switch to of English in a short while, but I would like to take this opportunity for inviting us here and for holding this forum, which has never been more relevant. There are unilateral tendencies, and we need to make sure that when faced with large global challenges, we do not come up with bilateral solutions, but multilateral solutions.
There are three things that we have to do very clearly in these days. The first one is to say what's obvious, but that must be recalled and reminded permanently. War is not a way of settling disputes among states or people. War cannot be a way of conducting your foreign policy. And the second thing is international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions is not an option. It's not something that you decide if you enforce them or not. They are not beautiful philosophical ideas. They must be enforced and they are binding for everyone. And we have, and Spain tries to do it, we have to be coherent in our foreign action. Spain says exactly the same thing, whether it's in Ukraine or Gaza or beyond, in Sudan, in the Sahel, in any scenario, always for the same principles, looking for the same objectives. We defend international law, international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians. We say that war is forbidden to settle disputes among a state. Because if we are not coherent, we will be weakened in our action when we are confronted to actors that violate international law and international humanitarian law. And we have to recall that there is an accountability, because it's not an option. The Geneva Conventions are not optional. International humanitarian law is binding for everyone. Even if you are into an armed struggle, you must respect the life of civilians. You cannot just go and bomb anyone at any time, whenever you want. You cannot go and to prevent foodstuff from entering a specific area. There is an accountability. And we must always back international courts, whether it's the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court. And we must not be ashamed or afraid of naming things. A crime is a crime, whoever is committed it. It doesn't matter where it happens. Once again, we go back to the idea of coherence. Without coherence, we will be weakened. We will be weakened in our diplomatic action, and we will be weakened when we are confronted to other partners that say, you pick and you choose the countries, the places, the region, the continents in which you apply your principles. And that's what Spain tries to do, you have to move to action. You have a political stance that must be coherent. You must speak always under the same principles with the same objectives. And then going into action, first is funding. We have tripled our humanitarian assistance. And very recently, last night, we have taken the decision to send one of our field hospitals to Jamaica, where it's been really, really destroyed and hit by this hurricane. But our humanitarian assistance, it's on the ground, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's back in UNRWA. As soon as we can, it will go into Gaza. And we have to fund also the international organization. If you choose right now UNRWA, and that's one of our main focus right now, it's more important than ever to be back in UNRWA. And we have to recall it, UNRWA is an indispensable UN body. The life, that something as basic as foodstuff or education for 6 million of Palestinians in the Middle East depends on UNRWA. So it's not time to back away from United Nations body. It's the time to reinforce and to increase, as Spain is doing it. We have multiplied by 3 our finance to all these institutions. It's the time to be with them. And we can act with other partners. We do a lot with France. We share most of our point of view, and with John Noel, a good friend, we exchange very often. We do things at the European level, at the UN level, in a sort of coalition of the willing sometimes. We are having a very strong Euro-Arab voice right now in the Middle East. It's the time to get together and to stick to our principles and to the institution. We do it also with the Red Cross. So this is a time in which there is a big temptation to go back to the 19th century, to accept once again that war can be, at some moments, under some conditions, a way of conducting and carrying your foreign policy. We must be very clear. And this forum, it's a way of putting it forward. Diplomacy, negotiation remains the only reasonable way, the only lasting way of getting deals, of getting lasting peace. And the second thing, there will be no unilateral solution to global problems. Peace, it's a global issue, and we are all concerned. International law, defending international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians, it's something global. It doesn't matter where it happens. It hit and it has an impact on all of us. And therefore, we must continue backing United Nations, international organization, and also try to look for multilateral solutions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ms. Ollongren, the EU is supporting important work in the humanitarian sector to address both prevention of human rights law and IHL violations and increased protection for civilians, as well as supporting human rights defenders, documenting violations, and fostering accountability, effectively moving from policy to action. How is the EU leveraging all this work to anticipate crises and prevent violations before they escalate, rather than responding after the fact? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you also to the other panelists. I think you find here a panel that is in violent agreement and that are strong supporters what we believe in, the rule of law, IHL, prevention of conflict. And I think to answer your question, why does the EU try to choose the road of prevention and action? It is because we see what is happening. There is a big paradox out there. We have built a system of international rule of law. And it's never been more elaborated. It's never been more accessible than it is today. And it's also never been more under threat than it is today. UNRWA was mentioned, the UN as a system, the ICC, as was mentioned, also the ICJ. They're all being attacked and questioned. And that means that we have to stand up and we have to counter this paradox, and we have to work also on that narrative. I think it's not enough to remind people that we have this system, but we have to go to the core of why we have this system. Because you could argue there are now so many conflicts, as Marciana said, there are so many wars, there's so many people suffering, killed, there are so many people that have to flee their countries. Why weren't we able to prevent it? Why have we come to the situation where might seems to make right if we're not careful? So apparently we are not able to prevent everything. I think that this system is something that does prevent actually conflicts to happen, but that we live in times where state and non-stately actors do not care about the international humanitarian law. In wars, civilians, medical care, humanitarian aid, they're supposed to be protected by our rules. And we know that they are not. We've seen it. We see it today in Sudan. We see it in Gaza. We see it in Ukraine. We see it in Myanmar and other places in the world. That does not mean that it's not something worth protecting, worth advocating for. And I think that is what the EU is trying to do. We recognize that we have to be the voice of this, especially in the current world. That's what the world expects of us. That's what's in our treaty and what is in the DNA of the Union that we have built, which began as a peace project. And I think here at the Peace Forum, we should keep that in mind. And the European Union is a very successful peace project. There have been no more wars among the countries that are in the Union. We see many countries outside the European Union striving to be a member of this family, like Ukraine and the Western Balkans and others. And I think that is very important. And that means that these countries share the values, share the human rights and the universality of the human rights, the principles of democracy that we adhere to. And that is why I'm personally also a very strong believer in what we, I think, used to call soft power. So now that the world is focusing very much on the capacity building on the military side, because we see the security threats, and they're there, so we need to do it. But it has to go hand in hand with the soft power, the capacity building, the advocacy for the rule of law. And I would like to underline one very important point in this system that we build, and that is accountability. And that makes the circle round, because if a conflict happens and wars break out, there will be a post-conflict situation. And we start as the European Union and many European countries. France did so, the Netherlands did so when the large-scale war in Ukraine broke out, starting to gathering evidence of war crimes almost immediately. Cooperate with the country concerned, be it Ukraine, Syria, was the same thing. The accountability starts during the war, because it's then that the evidence needs to be collected. This is not without danger. States need to step in. NGOs have to be enabled to do their very difficult work. And prosecutors and international courts need to start to work on the cases, so that we one day will have the accountability. Because if there's no accountability, there's impunity. And we know where impunity leads. It leads to more conflict. So it is a circle. It is important work that is not always visible. I think you will see that the EU does many things without being very vocal about it. And especially now that we see a world wherein, let's say, transactional deals are made, where peace is declared. That's not how it works. There is not, you don't go from war to peace in one day. You can leave everything behind you. The accountability side is hard work and takes a long time, but is absolutely necessary for building up the society in the countries concerned, and for being able to leave the past behind you and to turn towards a peaceful future.
Thank you very much. And I like your quote about the EU being a successful peace project. That's interesting. And you're right. I mean, it's a good transition for the second round of questions around accountability and the connection between war and peace. Mirjana, if I may come back to you. Within the global initiative, the ICRC and member states are looking at the connections between respect for international humanitarian law and lasting peace. It may seem counterintuitive to many in the room that the rules that govern how wars are fought can also play a role in how those wars end. From your experience, working on the front lines of conflict, how does international humanitarian law contribute to pathways back to peace?
Thank you, Hisham. And I want to start by saying that 2 years ago, we maybe wouldn't have had this level of informed debate about what it means to uphold the rules of war and how relevant they are to all of us. 1 year into the initiative, we already see results. We have conducted hundreds of consultations in which 130 states have taken part. That's what Jean-Noël said, the practical side of the initiative. We want to translate the abstract notion of international humanitarian law into practical measures, because it is implementable. States can do more within their national sovereignty. We do this in 7 work streams. 3 focus on the relationship between IHL and prevention, IHL and peace, and nationalization of IHL. 4 focus on the conduct of hostilities, protecting civilian infrastructure, especially, and we have a dedicated work stream on this, health systems, new technologies and cyber in warfare, and naval warfare, which is also increasingly dominating in today's conflicts. What we see on the ground, and we are directly involved in the processes now in Gaza, in the DRC, in Thailand and Cambodia, in Sudan, and in many other places, is that the first steps to peace are always humanitarian. It always starts with either safe passage, increased access for humanitarian assistance, but mostly through the exchange of detainees as a first confidence-building measure. You exchange detainees, you release hostages, you bring back prisoners, even before a ceasefire is consolidated, but it helps upholding the ceasefire so that you can enter into larger political conversations. Mind you, the operation we conducted and are still conducting in Gaza is highly complex, highly sensitive, and highly dangerous also for everybody involved. And it is still ongoing, and we still insist that we complete this first phase because the ceasefire must hold. Millions of lives hang in the balance of the ceasefire. If hostilities are resumed, there's no resilience left for the people. Now, IHL doesn't prevent war, but it prevents barbarity in war. And this is important, and this is why, as the Spanish foreign minister said, we cannot allow ourselves to apply double standards. We have to treat a human life as a human life, no matter on which side of the line you find yourself, because that's the guarantee to return, to ever be able to return on a pathway to peace. If you break and dismantle the guardrails that prevent total barbarity to happen, then it will take a much, much longer time, generations, before you can come back to normalcy. And we have to prevent this, because wars inform each other. When you dismantle the rules in Gaza, when you continue tolerating what happens in Sudan, you send the signal to 450 armed groups, non-state actors, that everything is allowed. Now, their force today is amplified by new technologies. We saw drones travel 2,000 kilometers in Sudan and hit precisely the airport in Port Sudan. You know that these weapons can hit any European city at any moment. This is the future of warfare, and this is what we need to contain. IHL stands in the way of total victory, because total victory at the end becomes self-destructive. The moment you say that total victory is possible, that no rules apply, you expose your own population as a political leader to the threat of war and to the threat of being treated with a dismissiveness that we see towards civilians in many theaters of conflict today. It will haunt us if we don't stop it. And this is why this initiative is so important. And it will not succeed without political leadership, because armed groups are bound by the law, as are states. But the primary responsibility lies with states to uphold international humanitarian law according to the spirit of the law and by not applying different standards to different partners. What is most effective is when states call their allies and tell them to stop breaking the law. It's much more effective than denouncing your enemy or your friend's enemy in public. Only when states call their allies can we access hostages, can we access the civilian population, can we bring help and respite that is necessary to open the door for peace. Remember, Dayton was concluded with a first chapter that contained the all-for-all exchange of prisoners. The ICRC is mentioned in 100 peace treaties, ceasefire agreements, and different kinds of memoranda. Has been over the last 100 years. We don't have the footprint of our UN partners. They are important, as we have heard. We rely on the UN for bringing in hundreds of trucks. But you also need neutrals that work confidentially and discreetly, that are strictly independent and impartial to create this pathway back to stability, back to formal economies. And this is what we want to see in the Middle East, and this is what we want to see in the Horn of Africa, and certainly also in Eastern Europe. So we need the states to work with us on this.
Thank you, Mariana. Taking away that humanitarian action is always the first step to peace, and that discrete peer pressure from states to states is a great deterrent for violations. Monsieur le Ministre, France is a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
Mr. Minister.
In a world where the Council is increasingly gridlocked, the institutions, once seen as the custodians of international humanitarian law, often struggle to act in a timely or unified manner. In such a context, who should now assume the moral and political responsibility for upholding IHL? Thank you.
Well, I don't see any other credible fora than the Security Council. I do think that the Paris Peace Forum can play, in certain instances, an important role, in particular for those forgotten conflicts or tensions that risk deriving into full-blown wars. This is the case in certain regions in Africa. This is the case of the Western Balkans, and you've probably noticed that a number of Western Balkan leaders were present this week in Paris for this 8th edition, and that the French president hosted a meeting with the 3 members of the Bosnian presidency, which is something that really does not happen anywhere else in the world today. And so Paris Peace Forum has, I think, an important role to play to facilitate discussions leading to the reduction in tensions and avoidance of future conflicts. But the Security Council will or has to play a very important role moving forward. And that's why we're pleading so hard in favor of Security Council reform, to unlock those decisions that are blocked by veto in the case where the most basic human rights are affected. That's the veto initiative that we're carrying with Mexico, and then we need a Security Council that is more legitimate, and that's why we're pleading for an extension of the permanent members around the tables, such that the decisions of the Security Council carry the weight of more representativeness of the world like it is today, not like it was 80 years ago. So, as a permanent member, we'll work hard for this, for these institutions to be reformed and reinforced. And I think again that the Paris Peace Forum can be a useful rendezvous, a useful meeting point every year for all of those who care enough about multilateralism and efficient multilateralism to gather and find ways to build coalitions, not to compete against traditional multilateralism, but to strengthen it from the inside.
Merci beaucoup. So, reforming rather than replacing. This is your term. Thank you. Minister Alvarez, Spain has not hesitated to speak up against the IHL violations being committed in Gaza and has taken bold diplomatic measures to increase pressures on Israel around that. How can we up the ante and ensure that those who disregard IHL are held accountable? Thank you.
I think this is a key element of what we are facing in the next few months and in the next few years. It's if you can violate with total impunity international humanitarian law in Gaza, or if you take Ukraine, if you can go into a war of aggression in total impunity, it's very clear that the world in the future will be less safe for everyone. We must state very clear principles, and Spain is doing it. One is that humanitarian assistance must be able to go into the Gaza Strip unimpeded, without any obstacle. We have to hold accountable all those that have been, with total impunity, killing humanitarian workers, hundreds of humanitarian workers from UNRWA and other organizations have been killed in the Gaza Strip. And we have to recall that the ICJ rulings are binding for everyone in United Nations, including the State of Israel. This is very basic, and as you were saying, our own security is at stake. Now we have to work to consolidate this ceasefire. And we must make sure that humanitarian assistance can go into the Gaza Strip really without any obstacle, with impartiality and independence. Israel cannot have a right of veto on who is having access to food today or tomorrow. And at the end, we all know what will be the real solution for peace and security for everyone, including the Israeli people in the Middle East, the two-state solution. And in a very basic, what the motivation of Spain, of everything we are doing concerning Gaza, is two things. One is to make sure that we are coherent with what we say everywhere in the world, especially in Ukraine. That when we uphold international law, international humanitarian law in Ukraine, and we protect the civilian, we do it also in Gaza, because that makes stronger our case in both places. And the other one is we are a country that doesn't accept as natural that the only way that have the people in the Middle East, very clearly Palestinian and Israelis, to relate to each other is through violence. There is not a sort of historical curse that says that that's the only way they can relate to the other. There must be another way. We are very well placed in Europe, Spain and France, we are very well placed to know that the border it used to be a sort of biblical curse for us. You used to have wars with your neighbor. European Union construction has turned that into a virtuous circle in which your neighbor is the one with the one you cooperate. We really believe that this is possible in the Middle East for everyone, including Palestinian and Israelis. And the bottom line of everything is, in order to do that, you must accept that you must respect principles that are binding for everyone in humanity, and if not, you must be accountable and held accountable for that.
Thank you very much, Ministro. So accountability is a must, judicial and as well humanitarian work. Ms. Ollogren, the EU strategic framework stresses that fight against impunity and strengthening accountability, as you mentioned, is a must and a priority. Given that IHL is often violated without immediate consequence, what practical steps is your office taking to support international justice mechanisms, such as the ICC or hybrid tribunals, in documenting IHL violations and closing the accountability gap? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we can say that we have established here, and I very much underline what the other panelists have said, that we think that, first of all, international law must govern the fate of countries and people, and not violence. And secondly, that the international system of justice is under threat currently. It requires, as Mariana said, it requires political leadership. That means political will. I would even say political courage, as the two ministers here are showing. I think that's very important. And that is, I think, what Europe and the European Union must do as well. And we must be very concrete. We must also recognize that we cannot do it alone. No one can. So you ask me what I can do, and what I can do is to try to bring people together, to promote a coalition building, and to connect to civil society, because civil society plays a vital role in all of this. Civic space is shrinking. We see it happening really everywhere, I would say. They are our partners in this. There are partners inside all these areas that have been mentioned of conflict, all these wars, all these regions, all these countries. They are a vital partner also in accountability, because they are there. They have the pulse of the people on the ground. They're in the field. They are able to do this dangerous work of collecting evidence and making it available to the ICC or to the Prosecutor General in the country itself, if that's possible, like in Ukraine. And I think personally, I've been very involved also in Ukraine. What we have seen there in the past 3 years during the large-scale invasion, during the war, the very serious work that's been done to prepare for after the war. It can serve as an example, I think, of international coordination and cooperation. We see, the cooperation with the ICC. We see the establishment of a special tribunal. And I think it's vital that we uphold that, because it also will show our credibility as Europeans to the rest of the world. And of course, the double standards, we discussed it, it's there, we have to face it, but it's so important to speak out and to say that this system is for everybody, and everybody's treated equally under this system. And the ICC is doing its work in complete independence, and we will defend them to make sure that they're able to do their work in complete independence. And that would be my last remark, saying and repeating that without accountability there will be impunity. And I think in these difficult times, those who are responsible, it's a heavy responsibility on our shoulders, but we have to face it.
Thank you very much. And in my early days as a young investigator at the ICC myself, working on Sudan and Congo, I can only commend your words and praising the work and independence of this court. It is essential. To close the session, we are witnessing a marked increase in state-on-state conflict around the world, and in many of them, international humanitarian law does not only seem less implemented, but its principles deliberately misinterpreted, distorted, or fundamentally questioned by some. The challenge before us today is not only to reaffirm those principles, but to implement some of the concrete actions that our brilliant panelists have spoken about today. This forum, the Paris Peace Forum, is one of the best ways as well to speak about that in a serene manner, but in a concrete manner. It is the only way to ensure that the IHL remains credible, unforeseeable, and humane in the realities of today's conflict. The world is at a turning point. It is our collective responsibility, all upon us, you, our political leaders, parties to conflict, to better protect civilians. Protection of civilians should remain a strategic, political, and military objective in every action that we intend to do. I want to thank you. I want to thank the panelists. Please give them a round of applause.